Hello friends, let's have a quick look at this electrophysiology MCQ. A cell is hyperpolarized either by efflux of potassium or influx of chloride. The only exception to this is a cell that is hyperpolarized due to the efflux of sodium, and this cell is. That was the MCQ asked on my social media platforms this week. Well, let me explain it. Either potassium exits the cell, so positive charges are leaving and therefore there is hyperpolarization, or influx of chloride, negative charges, again the hyperpolarization. That's the case everywhere in the body, but there is one exception, and in this exception, efflux of sodium results in hyperpolarization. So, which cell is this? Is it the rod in the retina, the receptor for vision, or hair cell in the cochlea, or intrafusal fiber in the muscle spindle, or glomus cell in the carotid body? Many students tried to answer this MCQ and they ticked the hair cell in the cochlea, thinking that there is some exception even in the case of hair cell of the cochlea. Well, no. That was not the answer. The answer is rod in the retina. So let's understand why that is the case. Okay, here is a typical rod in the retina. You know, the rods and cones are the receptors for vision. Now, in the case of rod, it has got four different segments: outer segment, inner segment, nucleus, and synaptic body. The synaptic body synapses with the second cranial nerve fibers, the optic nerve fibers. Now what happens is, even in the complete darkness, when no light photons are reaching the rod, no light is reaching the retina, there is a sodium current or sodium cycle which is going on. That is, in the outer segment of the rod, there is sodium channel. Sodium influx happens through this channel into the outer segment. And then the inner segment has the sodium potassium pump, our favorite sodium potassium pump. It throws the sodium out. So sodium sent out from the inner segment and brought back in via the outer segment. This cycle is going on in the complete darkness, means in the absence of light. And this cycle generates some amount of synaptic transmission. That is, glutamate is released steadily and that generates impulses in the optic nerve fibers. Now, when the light strikes the rod, when light reaches the retina and strikes the rod, certain reactions take place in the outer segment of the rod. There is bleaching of rhodopsin and there are certain chemical reactions that take place, and as a result of that, the sodium channel in the outer segment is blocked. Now what happens is, sodium is thrown out by the sodium potassium pump, but it cannot come back in to the outer via the outer segment. So sodium leaving the rod results in hyperpolarization of the rod. So light striking the rod causes hyperpolarization of the rod, and that results in a decreased neurotransmitter release, a decreased release of glutamate at the synaptic body, and it reduces the number of impulses in the optic nerve fibers, and that is perceived as the sense of light. So this is what happens. The point here was sodium efflux. The mention was sodium efflux, which gave the impression of a diffusion, but it's not a diffusion actually. It's the sodium potassium pump which is throwing the sodium out, and this resulting in the hyperpolarization of the rod. So therefore, the important concept that you should understand by this MCQ is that the rod receptor potential is a hyperpolarizing potential and not a depolarizing potential. Look, we all know that when we apply a stimulus to a particular receptor, there is a depolarizing current generated, and then when it is good enough in amplitude, it converts into the action potential, which is carried by the sensory nerve. So that is the rule. Depolarizing potential, receptor potential is a depolarizing potential everywhere else in the body for all the other sensations. But in the case of vision, in the case of rod, its receptor potential is not a depolarizing potential, but a hyperpolarizing potential, as we saw just now. So this was the important concept that was to be brought out by this particular MCQ. I'll just add one more thing. Hair cell in the cochlea also has some exception. What is the exception? The exception is, look, hair cell in our labyrinth is surrounded by a fluid called as endolymph. And this endolymph, although it is extracellular fluid, it has a rich concentration of potassium. It has got high potassium concentration. That's exceptional. Normally ECF has a low potassium. This particular ECF has a high potassium, and therefore depolarization of the hair cell is not because of the sodium entry, as is the case everywhere, but it is because of the potassium entry. Potassium is high on the outside, and therefore potassium entry from the top of the hair cell results in depolarization of the hair cell in the cochlea. So this is again an exception, and probably students got mixed up with this exception. But what was asked was hyperpolarization as caused by the sodium exit from the cell, and the answer was rod cell in the retina. So remember this, receptor potential for the rod is a hyperpolarizing potential and not a depolarizing potential.